Ultimately, when you're assigning out tasks to team members, you want to build a culture of accountability and responsibility and transparency and make sure that everybody knows who is doing what by when and there is no confusion and clear expectations by and here's how I expect the thing to be done. A system on how you issue out an invoice through Xero works at that level, and at a high level, a system that might be an overview process of the way that you deliver your core product or service. And maybe it's high level with key milestone steps. So it's just basically a series of steps that, when followed, produce a consistent outcome.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast where I have the pleasure of simplifying the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. In today's episode, we're diving into a conversation that could completely change the way that you run your practice. My guest is none other than David Jenyns, one of the world's leading experts on systematizing small businesses. We're talking all about where to begin when creating systems, how to know when a system is good enough to be implemented. We chat about the latest AI tools that can help to supercharge your efficiency. Plus, David will walk us through how do we create a culture where your team actually uses the systems that you put in place so there's no more excuses. And if you feel way too busy to even think about systems, then David breaks down the exact steps to help you reclaim your time. Now, be sure to stick around right the way to the very end because David has set aside a limited number of his books for our listeners, completely free, okay? You won't want to miss this episode. Let's go chat with David. Dave, welcome back to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you, my friend?
I am awesome. A pleasure to be back.
It's a great pleasure for me too. Your book is right up there with one of the top 10 most important books that I've read. And I'm really excited to have you back. We were together about 12 or 18 months ago talking about systems. And where that all fits in there too. Can you give our listeners who perhaps missed our round one a bit of a background of your journey, that what led to you now being one of the world's leading experts in systems for small businesses?
Yes, I have been an entrepreneur and business owner my whole life, tried various different businesses. All of them tended to have a flavor for systems and processes in them. I think my earliest influence probably came from my dad. He was a systems engineer, and I rolled some of those ideas into a rock and roll clothing music store that we were franchising. So we set up the franchise manuals there. I was involved in the stock market education space, which was all about developing trading plans. And then it wasn't until my last business, a digital agency, where for some reason I got stuck in that business. And I thought this business was different. And all of the previous learnings I had around process, I kind of thought, hang on, Google keeps on updating its algorithms, so I can't write a process because it's going to get out of date. And this is a digital creative agency. And if I put process in here, it's going to take away some of that creativity. And I'm the subject matter expert who understands what the algorithms are doing. And of course, I need to be the center point for clients and team and everything. So really, I ended up just building this business heavily dependent on me, got stuck in it for 10 years. And then we had that moment when I found out we're pregnant, and I thought something's got to change. And I knew that you could build a digital agency that was systems driven, not owner dependent, because I'd seen other peers do it and others in the industry. So I thought, well, I need to go back to basics here. What do I know? And I know systems and processes are the way out. And I challenged a lot of those assumptions, that those new bad habits that I'd picked up. And I worked myself out of that business, stepped out of it for a few years, and then ultimately ended up selling it. But I realized on that journey, I'd lost my passion for the digital agency. I just didn't love it like I used to. And I thought, well, what do I really want to do? And then that's when I started to go, well, I have naturally people coming to me and asking me how I was able to step out of the day-to-day operations of the digital agency, how I got a CEO in there, and how I took some good amount of time off. And then through a series of fortuitous events, I just had an amazing opportunity serve up on my lap to work with Michael Gerber, the author of the E-Myth, the original godfather of small business systems. And that played such a pivotal role in going, hang on, this is where my passion is. I need to chase this. And now I've just gone all in on it and I solved this one problem. I help business owners go from not having any systems or process in place to starting to put the foundations in of systems and process, even if they're not a systems person or don't see themselves as a systems person. I think you can still build a systems driven business and develop the pathway to do that, which is systemology.
Mm. Can you define that? Let's take it right back to basics. Like, what do you mean by a system or a
Yeah.
process? Are they interchangeable, those words?
In the book, I put them as interchangeable. There are different definitions for systems, process, work instruction, SOP, standard operating procedures. There are variations, and each of those words do have different definitions, but that's part of the reason why a lot of people get confused is because there are just so many different terms. So I simplify it all under the term systems because that works at a very micro level and it works at a very macro level. At the
Mm-hmm.
micro level, a system on how you issue out an invoice through Xero works at that level. And at a high level, a system that might be an overview process of the way that you deliver your core product or service. And maybe it's high level with key milestone steps. So it's just basically a series of steps that, when followed, produce a consistent outcome. And that's what I think a system is, a series of steps that, when followed, that produce a consistent outcome.
And so my listeners, I think, will fit into two groups primarily. There'll be a bunch of chiropractors who will have very little to no systems in their practice. And then there'll be a smaller group who have systems in their practice, but those systems are in the form of an office manual that's probably in the cupboard with dust all over it. I wonder if we can talk to those that don't have anything in play really yet. They're two. Where do you start?
Yeah. The first thing is, it's a bit like eating an elephant. You start with the first bite.
Yeah.
You need to think about what are the essential tasks that are going on in your business. Generally, I focus people into tasks that relate to the delivery of a core product or service. And it could be anything from grabbing the attention of your target audience to converting those people into clients to onboarding them into your system to meeting with them and doing the work that you do and booking them in to come back. It's that linear journey. And I say start there because if you can start to systemize elements of the business that make money, that ensures that over time the business potentially could make money without you, or it might even just start off if you just want to systemize all of the administrative stuff around the work that you do, which then will free you up to see more clients and patients. So at least then you can focus on the highest value activity. That's the aim of game in business. You always want to focus your attention on the highest value activities and delegate down to typically less skilled, lower cost team members, everything else. And then
Yeah.
at some point in time, you might build out some other chiropractors who can take some of this work, or maybe they take certain type of work off your plate that's just the routine visit, as opposed to you then start to handle more specialty type work. So it's just this game of constantly working up the value of those tasks for the highest skilled team members.
Mm. Would I be right in saying sometimes, we're thinking about systematizing our practice. It's not just to remove ourselves from it. It will improve efficiency and productivity. It'll give better practice experience, which will improve referrals. It might just make your job a whole bunch easier. So you might not be thinking like David was, I want to get myself out of this job, but maybe you just want to make it more enjoyable, more profitable, more fun for people there. So, and then going back in terms of where to start, what I often recommend, and I don't know whether I'd like your feedback on this, is if we just start maybe from the first telephone call that somebody has to your practice. Let's take a new patient. We go, There's the first telephone call, what needs to happen with that? And then they come into the practice for the first time, what needs to happen with that? And so these might be primarily admin staff that are managing that too. Then what process needs to go on with the chiropractic itself? And you might take that reasonably all the way through to somebody's finished their initial intensive care, which might be anywhere from, 6 to 12 weeks. And what I often get people to do is, what are all the touch points and steps that need to happen along the way? And then how do we actually create a predictable set of steps or systems? So rather than those being done willy-nilly, we can actually have those done at best practices. Would that be a reasonable spot for someone to start?
I think for the clients that you're chatting with, I would say that's a great place because a lot of them are coming to you potentially already pretty busy and maybe
Yep.
having got an existing practice that's up and running and operating. One little tweak on that just to make that work on or for all chiropractors is I'd say think about that linear journey that you just mapped, and you might even go one step before, which is how do you grab someone's attention? As in, how does
Yes.
your prospect become aware of you? And then once you've mapped that journey that you just talked about, then I ask the question, and where in that journey is the pain? As in, for you as the chiropractor, you're like, ooh, if I got 10 more clients tomorrow, that would be so painful for me because I wouldn't be able to handle the onboarding and getting them into the system correctly, or I wouldn't be able to deliver and do the work. Sometimes thinking about where in that journey is the pain helps you focus even more.
Okay. To look for in terms of the urgency of where to begin with the system.
Yeah, where to
Yes.
prioritize. Exactly right.
Yeah, love it. Okay. So that one way to look at it is just go through linearly in terms of, from a linear point of view, in terms of first touch point. But the other would be, where are we getting stuck? Where do things be back up? Where's the experience not great? Where is our frustration? And you could begin there.
Yeah, and you still do the step that you said, which is high level. Start off
Yes.
with the linear first because your brain works best just going, and then what happens next? And then what happened next? So you start high level just to go, well, here's the journey. But then when you start to lean into, and which processes are we going to document? How are we going to
Mm.
capture this? Like, that's what I'm talking about, leaning into where the pain is on that. You might go, well, I've got so many clients that I don't need to worry about lead generation right now. Well, don't systemize that if you're
Yes.
completely full with patients. Lean into where the pain is.
Yes. And sometimes too, lead generation is a lot of what I help chiropractors with. And sometimes the reason I tell them not to start with the systems there is there's so much they don't know yet. So there has to be a lot of teaching first. Whereas in their practice, in terms of answering the phone and welcoming the patient, at least the things are in place. That, like, if I've got to teach somebody social media marketing, and then Instagram, and then sell by chat, all those sorts of things there too. Before we can put the systems in place, it's like I've got to build some skills in around that. Let's get those, and then let's kind of systemize it there as well. But even if it's something completely new, like lead generation, do you begin with systems there, or do you begin with the skill set first?
Generally, you have to think about where you're going to get leverage. Like, we don't just document a system for documenting sake. We document it so that it can be delegated to someone, they can take it over, and potentially we can then create some extra capacity and space.
Yes.
So I love the idea of going, well, what are we currently already doing that's working? Do you have an admin assistant or someone
Mm.
sitting alongside of you that might be able to take chunks off? And there might be elements, generally, like if it's a brand new thing that you've never done before and it requires a certain amount of thought and testing, and, because this is a new area, well, that's going to need your highest skilled person or you to be
Yes.
really spearheading and tackling that because it's going to require that unique thought. So starting sometimes with the low-hanging fruit first, the easier stuff makes it easier
Mm.
to delegate, which then creates the space, which then means you can move into more challenging things like you're talking about, which might be things you're solving or tackling for the first time.
Mm. For many people in the early phases of thinking about systems, their practice, it can often be seen as not all that sexy. We've got a business owner who's creative and a chiropractor who I just want to help patients. And now here I'm doing this. And once they start to see the capacity that opens up from systems, and I'm this person exactly, like the conversation with me of systems 10 years ago, I would have fallen asleep. And now I just love the heck out of them because I see what they bring me there too. But I want to, like, I'm talking to some of our listeners now too. So many of them are holding on to staff that aren't performing properly. And the reason they're holding on to staff that aren't performing properly is because they tell me it's too hard to find somebody new. And then I'll often say to them, what if you had a really clear job description? What if you had really clear KPIs? And what if you had really clear systems that actually showed somebody how to answer the phone, how to do all these things? And so you could onboard somebody really quickly and either know they're the right person or the wrong person within 4 weeks. Would that have you think differently about it? And the answer is almost always yes. And so when we start to have these systems in place, it brings an enormous amount of lightness into practice. The fear and trepidation that we have in around, whether it be marketing, acquisition, retention of our staff or our patients there too. It's like, I've got a playbook for that stuff. These are things that tend to make it a lot easier there too. Can you walk through what you think is appropriate? And we'll revisit on this a little. Once somebody, let's just say that it is the answering of the phone for a new patient that's calling for the first time. And we want to actually create a system out of that. So where does somebody start all the way through to perhaps completion with that task?
Yeah. So a few things that you said a moment ago were incredibly astute as far as your understanding. So I want someone to kind of go back and listen to that chunk that you said around the recruitment and getting the right thing. Because the reality is there are two types of people in this world. There are those that follow systems and those that don't. And in business, you get to choose. Chances are, when you first recruited, you didn't give this a second thought. You didn't hire a systems-driven person or someone who follows checklist or process or whatever. You just hired someone that you thought could fill the role. But once you get this and you see the difference between businesses that have process and those that don't, and this goes double if you are a chiropractor that doesn't see themselves as a systems person, then you better well make sure that you are surrounded by systems-driven team members to help fill those gaps where you're not necessarily strong. So you want to build into this whole process of recruitment to find systems-driven people, because for all of the points you made at the start, they deliver better outcomes for clients. They're better for the staff. They're better for you as the business owner. There's all those different reasons. So I just want to kind of touch on that because that little connection there is a critical one. And then you'll start to go, oh, this is important to find these people. Because if you find the right person and you get them into place, they will actually make everything easier for you. So it's worth the effort. I know there's a little bit of pain you have to go through, and especially if you've got someone on board who's not the right person, but they might also be holding you back from moving through to that next level.
Yep.
So with regards to the question around extraction, where do you start? I always say just capture what you're currently doing, not what you would like to be doing, and capture this most probable path, what is most likely to happen. Don't worry about every single variation, because whenever there's variation or something doesn't go right or it doesn't quite follow the process, what's going to happen? It's going to get escalated to you anyway. And we need to give an underarm throw to this new person who's getting started. Well, should everything go smoothly and the client ask the right questions and they're the perfect target audience and they want to book in and there's no confusion, and okay, well, let's capture that as a process. And that's what you train someone on. The brand new team member just captures what you're currently doing in a nice, easy path. And then over time, they'll start to learn the exceptions. And then we can decide, do we add extra detail into this process for that exception? Or is that just something that you learn on the job as you go? But by also capturing what you're currently doing, not what you would like to be doing, it means that you can just get started and your practice is already kind of working. We're not looking at completely re-engineering right from the get-go every time we design a system. We capture what we're doing. That helps us to install a baseline. And then you can watch and go, where do things not go right? Where are things breaking down? And then you can start to work on the process after that. But you have to first get a baseline, record it getting
Yes.
done. And now it's really easy with ChatGPT. You just start off with recording what you're currently doing, get it transcribed, load it into ChatGPT and say, can you create a 5-step checklist for me just from this transcript? And that becomes draft number one. It's actually getting a lot easier to create
Yes.
these processes.
Great. I'm glad you went into that because that's one of my questions from because my advice has been record yourself doing it, pull your iPhone out, hit the record button, and do a mock initial consultation phone call. And even if it's you kind of talking to yourself, then get the transcript of that and upload that transcript up to ChatGPT and ask that same question there too. Can you? And I often say there, can you please turn this into a standard operating procedure?
Yep.
Would that be okay sort of language to have in there? And it's amazing what comes out. And that's round one as well. Are there any other sort of bits and pieces there that would help that process get a better outcome?
Oftentimes, ChatGPT will work best when you give it some examples of things that you like. So
Yes.
you can preload some process if you've done that in the past of ones that you like. Also, calling out a couple of the key elements. So over time, as you start to learn what you like, you just start to develop the prompt and you'll say, hey, I want to have the steps clearly numbered. I want you to identify the trigger right up front and say, this is what kickstarts this process. And at the conclusion, I want you to give me a small definition of what done looks like. So, I mean, these are just little tweaks that you will pick up along the way, starting off with, here's an example, here's a transcript. Can you now create me a draft? That's an excellent place to start.
Yeah, great. So once we've got because I think one of the things that holds lots of people back as well, and I know that it did me in the early days, is wanting round one to be perfect. And so that would hold me back because I know that in the initial consultation, 70% of people are going to call up and kind of flow through it the same way. And I'd get hung up on the 30% that need fancier kind of, dialogue back and forwards there too. And then I said, look, let's just deal with the masses to begin with. Let's just get that 70% done. And then with time, I can build out those other exceptions as we go forwards there too. Is that a reasonable kind of line of thinking to go with?
Yeah, for sure. One of the reasons that great team members are so important is because they will paper over the cracks of poor systems.
Mm,
So if you don't capture something, and just because you don't document it, doesn't mean it's going to magically stop happening in your business. And someone, whether it's you or the team member, will step up and fill in that gap. And we have to start somewhere. If we start with it's got to be perfect or capture all of these variations, then it just becomes a bigger thing in your head than it needs to be. And
mm,
you're putting it off, and then it becomes a big pile of work that needs to be done. And I'll get to that a little bit later. And we all know systems and processes, they're important, they're not urgent. So you will never get to them. And by building it up in your head to make it bigger than it needs to be, oftentimes just getting a version one down and getting
yeah,
momentum is more important than getting it just right. The momentum and building up the habits, and that's where you will learn those little tweaks of, oh, I typed that thing into ChatGPT and it didn't quite come out right, or when I recorded it, I didn't use the language that meant that ChatGPT could easily spot what the next step is. Like, you have to learn that by doing it. So yeah, I just say get started.
So when is enough? Like when do you go, okay, it's time for me to that's good enough for the initial telephone conversation now. Now I want to go into welcoming that patient in when we see them the first time face to face.
Yeah, I think there's a few things here. One, there's a point of saying, hey, it's enough. I can move on to grab another first draft. Uh, and the other thing I want to mention is it's never really enough in that
Mm.
you're creating a culture of systems and processes and never-ending improvement here. Like
Mhm.
you don't systemize your business and then get to the end and then you're done. But I think the point you were more clearly asking was at what point do we just move on to the next draft to capture
Mm.
the next thing and not get caught up? Sometimes it'll depend on who is the individual that is going to be doing this task. Like, there's no point in over documenting something if it's just going to be you. If at the
Mm.
moment you don't have the team member just yet, and we're creating a 5-step checklist or 5 questions that you ask for that incoming call, well, that might be enough for now. We don't want
Mhm.
to, there's no leverage in creating a really detailed process if it's just you. But if you've got an administrative assistant that might be able to take some of these things off your plate, well, maybe certain things are going to require more detail. And it depends on what that administrative assistant knows. Like, let's say bookkeeping, and you're thinking about what process might you need to issue out an invoice. If you've got a bookkeeper that knows zero inside and out, and you've just got to give them a couple of bits and pieces and then they smash it out, well, you might not need a really painstaking process that says go to zero, log in, hit enter, move to this screen. Then, like, I mean, they know how to do that stuff day in and day out. So there's no value there in that. So you have to think about who is doing the task and to what level of detail do they need to be able to
Yes.
execute it to a good standard.
Yeah. Would it be one of the steps I'll often talk about in there is after you've gone through and you've got a document from ChatGPT or some form of that, is to then just kind of test it. Like that makes sense there too. Can I hand that on to a staff person and can they reasonably do, some kind of testing iteration in there is certainly one of the things that you kind of talk about, sort of integrating it into the practice as well. Can you give me some
Mm.
feedback and best practices for testing and integrating it into a business?
Yeah. When I originally wrote Systemology, I wrote it for teams of 10 to 50 staff.
Yeah.
And then the more that it got out there, the more I realized how smaller practices needed it and how
Yeah.
smaller practices sometimes might only have 1, 2, 3 team members, like micro. So there are
Mm.
some minor adjustments in the book on how I'd approach it on a smaller team. When I talk about it in the book, we talk about, well, there are 2 people in this extraction process. There's the systems champion, and then there's the knowledgeable worker. And the systems champion works with the knowledgeable worker to capture and document, and then sends it back to the knowledgeable worker who will review it and then give the feedback and say, oh, yes, I think you've missed this step or that step or whatever. Now, that may or may not work for the listener who's listening right now to their
Yeah.
circumstance. So that testing bit will depend a little bit on you. I think giving it to the person who's going to do the task is a great one. Like, let's say you were the knowledgeable worker and you've recorded a short little video of how you do something. I would even then pass that video to that assistant, ask them to run it through Chat GPT and draft up the process and get it into place. And then they can ask you questions if they're not clear on a particular step. That way, they kind of take a little bit of ownership. They get a little bit involved. Maybe there are certain tasks where they're like, you might give them a whole bunch of processes and they say, oh, I could easily do this one, this one, this one. I don't reckon I could do this one. And
Mm.
then in that way, you start to select which things they might be able to take over. And then normally, again, depending on the complexity on the task, it's kind of like sometimes it's, hey, I'll do it, you watch. Next time you do it, I'll watch. And then the time after that, you're doing it and you just come to me if you've got questions. But it'll depend on the task and if it's something that you just think, is this high risk? If it's high risk, you might want to run
Ah.
alongside them a little bit longer. But if it's low risk and it's sending out an email reminder to a client or something like
Mm.
that, well, they might just be able to pass those reins a little bit quicker.
Yeah. I think one of the things I want to kind of reiterate my experience is that sometimes I've come up with systems, I've laid out the checklist, and because of my pre-knowledge, there are invisible steps that my brain is taking that I don't realize that it's taking. And then I hand it on to somebody else and they're not able to get the same result of me as me because I didn't realize that I just knew that information there too. And so having somebody else look at it for me is a really important step of saying, okay, I know that this makes sense to you. You might be tempted to think and call your staff names if they can't do it, but it's possible that, as you said, regard with Xero, that you just have pre-knowledge, which is invisible to you because you've had it for so long there too. So that stage of kind of testing some sort of iteration there is really important. Tell me on this, with advances in technology, particularly AI, are there other areas in there that other AI resources and tools that can be really helpful for people wanting to integrate this into their businesses?
Yeah, there most definitely are. ChatGPT is a great generalized tool that handles a lot of text related questions
Mm.
or problems. And it's a great place to start because I almost think of it in stages. Step number one is you get a process down. Like you need to be clear on what tasks are going on inside your business and how those tasks are complete. Step number two after that is then to ask the question, are there steps inside that process that I might be able to use ChatGPT and craft a prompt and then make that happen even quicker? The step after that is actually to find customized or tailored software that solves one specific problem and it's been designed to do that. Because ChatGPT is more of a general
Mm.
tool, whereas there are AI tools, and we're seeing them now in just about every software tool that you're using. They're starting to add in AI functionality for little bits and pieces. Like Xero now is using AI to help recommend what things should be reconciled into what accounts.
Yeah.
I mean, but we're seeing this at every level because just about every software company is starting to think about, well, how can we make our clients work easier by leveraging AI. And then so looking for software solutions that might solve very specific problems is probably that next step. The step after that is some sort of custom solutions as well that could be programmed, or you meet with, there are people who do automation or programming and you say, hey, here's this thing that I'm doing manually. Can we create some sort of automation to just get this done for me so I don't have to ever do it again? Now, I'm trying to think of a unique example, let's say for chiropractors. One, and not one comes to mind, you might have one, but I was working, for example, with a bookkeeper and she mapped out all of her processes and then thought, hey, some of these I want to start to just get the machines to do. And she's got this task where an assistant will log in once a week into the ATO portal for a client to crawl for any new communication from them, to read it and determine what action needs to be taken, and then to communicate it back through to the client. It's quite time consuming because you've got all of these clients and they're logging into these portals to read these things. And it's not anything magical that this human is doing other than reading it. Like it sounds like something a robot could do. So she worked with a programmer out of Singapore to go, well, this is what I'm doing manually. Can we now program it to get a machine to do it? Now, that for her was a task that saved her over 1,000 hours per year of
Yeah.
staff time just logging in with this one thing. Now, that's in something with, this high cycle time. She's doing it frequently. So you need to try and go through that thinking in chiropractic and think, where are the opportunities there and where does it make sense? I mean, that's probably another discussion on its own, but there's
Mm.
huge opportunity for any business now to be going, what are we doing and how does AI help us do it faster, cheaper, better?
Well, staying in that line in terms of software, what are the best practices nowadays as far as capturing this information? In my practice days, it was a folder with printed out pages on it there too that went through all of those. Is that best practice now? What are businesses doing?
It's always in the cloud these days, and there are some different solutions. We've got one called System Hub. We're just in the process of rebuilding it. Some people get started with Google Drive and using Google Documents or SharePoint. Definitely having something in the cloud so everybody can access it is key. You also want something that's simple. I think purpose built is best because the systems and the processes are one of the most important things. And systems and processes at the best of times have friction. I know now moving forward, everybody's going to be thinking about recruiting systems driven people and it's part of their recruitment process, and that will make it easier.
Mm,
That said, though, we just want to make it easy to find the how to document the system at the point at which you're doing the task.
yes.
So you never want to have it more than one click away.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if you've got a team member that's booking an appointment for a client, well, in the booking software, it would be great to have that link handy. Or maybe they set up a bit of equipment in the office. Well, you create a QR code that, when scanned, jumps them right to the system that shows them how to set up that piece of equipment. You just one click away is what you
Yeah.
need.
And with that too, one of the things that we have access nowadays to is it no longer needs to be just kind of the written word. It's so easy to embed multimedia. So, if I have that, go back to that system that says, look, here's a written down checklist of the initial consultation, and then click this link here for an audio or a video of me going through it, where you can then kind of notice tone and voice changes that go through the whole thing there also. This is really easy to do, and it makes things that are sometimes quite complex to put into words to say, well, here, watch me do this. Here's a video over my shoulder as I go step by step. Or it might just be, a screen recording rather than going step by step through it. Here's a screen recording that we can use. And so I'm really encouraging people to make sure that document is hyperlinked in with, video files and audio files and things like that as well. Is it necessary to have, full project management type sort of Asana, those Notion, those sorts of tools there as well?
Depending on the type of business that you're looking to build and the number of staff, ultimately, when you're assigning out tasks to team members, you want to build a culture of accountability and responsibility and transparency
Yeah,
and make sure that everybody knows who is doing what by when, and there is no confusion and clear expectations by, and here's how I expect the thing to be done. So a
yeah,
lot of people, when they first start out, and if they're very small teams, they might be working out of email. And email, it can be hard to remember what task and when you assign something out to someone and did they get it done. So that's one of the reasons we at some point suggest moving to some form of project management software, just to bridge that gap of who is doing what by when, and we all know it and it's clear. And if it's not done, it's very obvious. But you don't also want to start there. It depends on where you are in your business. I think starting off with some simple checklists and processes that, when you're working with a very small team, you've kind of got some areas of responsibility and you're also wearing multiple hats. So you will have certain team members that know, oh, yes, well, I handle the booking in of clients. So that's an area of responsibility for them. So, yeah, it's a bit of a depends answer,
Mm.
unfortunately.
Let's segue. And you brought it up. You talked about there being a culture of systems. Right back at the beginning, I kind of put many of our listeners into kind of two categories: those without any systems whatsoever, and those that have systems, but they're in the cupboard and they don't have a culture of systems. So let's just say that we've got it. We're really happy with the processes and the systems that we're running. How do we maintain that happening in the business?
Yeah. A big part of it is, and we just touched on the project management, it's very clear accountability
Mm,
and making sure that there's no room for confusion. Your great staff want to do great things. Oftentimes, when something's not done, it can be because they didn't know or you didn't clearly communicate what your expectations are. Getting systems and processes documented and this is how we do things here helps to remove that as an excuse for a team member to say, yeah, but I didn't know. Well, we have it documented in this process. It's one click away from when you're doing that particular task. And this is the way that it needs to be done. I don't mind if you have that system or process open every single time if you're doing it flawlessly. But if
Mm,
you're not doing it flawlessly or we're making mistakes or things are happening, my expectation is that you'll have that process open.
mm,
So that's part of it. The hardest bit is always the start, getting new staff on board and building up some of these new habits. But we want to build up the habit of we have a way of doing things. It's always the system's fault. If something goes wrong, we look to fix the process first before we blame the individual.
yes.
And this is a game of compounding. Systems have they pay compound interest and that grows over time. The value of them, it's getting one system in place today, another one tomorrow, another one. Like in the early days, you don't notice the impact as much. Once you've got a whole suite of them, and you've got systems driven people, and you've got a culture of looking to the systems and improving the systems, that's really when the magic starts to kind of kick in. So there are little things you can do to incentivize and build up culture, and you want to celebrate system wins and reward people who follow process, and um, encourage team
Mm.
members when they come on board to, whenever there's a question, well, we go look for the system first. There's a range of things like that that you do at the start to really build that culture.
We had a new staff member start with us recently, and we were going through some of the administrative tasks similar to what we're talking about beforehand. And she had had an extensive history in sales and immediately wanted to tell us ways that we could do things better. And it was an interesting, because I don't want to ignore the wealth of information that she has to bring with her. And yet we've got 10 years of proven track record that this works too. How do you, how often, and how do you sort of assess, hang on, let's bring something new in that maybe could make it better? How does all that work?
Mm. There's a few things. It's quite common, especially when you see someone move into a new leadership position
Mm.
and they'll want to come in, but the best new CEOs into positions or department heads, the first thing that they actually do is watch.
Yes.
Like, you don't understand what happens sometimes if you poke and change something over here, it can affect something down the line that you might not realize. So it's probably important to teach that new team member that, hey, we want to do this and we'd love to evolve and change, but it's really important that you first understand what we're currently doing so that you
Mm.
know if we make a change here, what are the down the line effects.
Yeah.
Um,
We,
so
there you go.
I was going to say, so one of the first things we talk about is we work towards minimum viable systems, making sure that we have the minimum number of systems in each department to ensure that that department delivers the result that it needs to for the business. And we get a basic set of systems so that way systems touch the entire organization. Once that's in place, then we can start to think a little bit more about optimization. You don't want to get to
Mm.
optimization too early
Yeah.
because of what I was saying. You don't know if you press somewhere what help happens elsewhere. So we get minimum viable systems in place. And then the best thing to do is actually let the business tell you what needs to be worked on or improved through listening to your metrics and when problems and issues arise. So if a certain thing is recurring, then we go, okay, well, let's fix that at the system level. What is the system or the process sitting behind that that's causing this issue? And how can we tweak and improve that? So generally speaking, you don't want to fix something just for fixing its sake. You're better off um, letting the business guide you as to what it needs. Otherwise, you can get caught up in busy work,
Mm.
improving things that aren't the highest priority, or who knows, like her suggestion might be great and it might
Yeah.
provide an improvement, but there's infinite number of things that can be improved in small business at any point in time, all the time.
Yeah. I think, I mean, and our response to that was, we have a value that kind of comes across as let's adopt, then adapt. So let's have you running
Mm.
this first and finding out where it fits into the bigger. And I want to know that we really value your opinion, just not yet. So let's get this all up and going. And then there can be a time that we review each of these, the two. I want to, you know, in with some staff members, and partially this has been the way that I have delivered it in the past, there's been a hesitancy and a hesitancy to take on systems because I've almost delivered them in a way that it's a form of micromanaging. It's like, this is a way that it's, and they've not liked that because there's new levels of accountability. It's like a micromanage there too. Whereas now we really frame it and we see it as, this is actually a way to make your job way more enjoyable, way easier. And this is part of that culture of, I like what you said before in terms of, we want to catch people using the systems and reward them. Because one of the biggest challenges, David, for chiropractors is I'm in the room adjusting people and I've got to trust that my front desk staff are out there doing that. Like I often can't hear them. And if I can hear them, I don't want to be listening to them because I want to be present with you while you're on the table and I'm adjusting you. And so we have to create this culture of safety and belonging. We have to create a culture of systems there as well. And that is one of the biggest challenges of, how do I know what's going on out there when I can't be sort of overseeing you? And some of those things you talked about before, when we do see it, reward process, how do we role play? How do we do all of those type of things there too? But do you have any kind of other tips in terms of just creating that culture that keeps people on track with the systems?
One of the biggest things is, as you're getting new team members on board, is onboarding them.
Yeah.
Like, generally, the biggest resistance and the ones that you'll worry about most are the ones that have been with you the longest, used to doing things a certain way. Why do we have to change? There's a lot of baggage that they're carrying around. You may not have recruited someone who might think in terms of systems. So it's dealing with that. So definitely for new recruits, you want to think about, how do you welcome them into the practice, and what are the first few systems and processes that they learn, and how do they cut their teeth, and what characteristics and what things do they see in other team members, and we have a way of doing things. So that's, be mindful of that onboarding piece. I think you hit the nail on the head for having them understand how this benefits them. That's another real key. You want them to be involved in the process and see that this is a win for them. And the other big one, and I'll go back to that accounting example, but it's really being felt across the board, especially if you're living in Australia or a first world country where we're seeing the cost of living go up. Everybody wants to be paid more. The only way that we can actually afford to pay you more is if we're getting more output from you and you're more valuable to the team. So whether that's capturing process and delegating down to less skilled, lower cost team members, or leveraging AI and automation and getting the machines to get things done. I mean, this is a pathway for you to become more valuable to the business. And if you're on that journey to want to get paid more, well, we're going to need more output to be able to pay for that position. So you have to be careful necessarily how that's communicated,
Yeah.
but it's something for the business owner to really think about. If you can get more done for less, then it gives you more margin to play with in how the business is run, which means you can hire higher talent and stronger talent. Like, this is a game of efficiency, and
Yeah.
by getting more efficient, you give yourself more options.
Yeah. We always liked and have found it really valuable. Remember Daniel Pink's book Drive, and he talks about what is it that kind of keeps people motivated at work. And he says they want mastery, so they want to be really good at what they're doing. They want autonomy. They don't want to be micromanaged there as well. And they want purpose. And I think if we can link the systems into that, where we can say, listen, all these systems in place here, so you just don't have to worry about me looking over your shoulder. Like, here's it is, I can let you do your job, I can do mine. And this will allow you to do your job much better as well, because we've tried and tested. This is going to show you the easy way through to deal with difficult patients and, keep things on track there as well. And the purpose why we're doing this anyway is that we want to really build a healthier community. So it's not just about revenue of the practice, is that we've got a community whose health that we want to change. And we find like if we just continue to wrap stuff in those all the time, it's
Yeah.
going to allow you to do your job better. You're going to have more purpose there too. And I'm going to get out of your hair as well. We found that helpful, whether that be talking to our chiropractors or whether it's our admin staff also. Sum things up today for me, perhaps the last bit there too. If there's a chiropractor listening at the moment and says, look, this all sounds fantastic, but I just don't have time to set all this stuff up. I'm already so busy and now I need to do all of those things. Can you perhaps just give some final advice that you might do for that person who's stuck in the business?
Yeah. There's two things I would say. Firstly, at some point, if you want to build a practice that delivers all of the things that you hoped for when you first got into business, you want some freedom and you're the business owner and it generates profit and you can do great in your community. All of this can only be achieved with systems and processes. So this is a bridge that you will have to cross at some point in time if you want to build that business. Otherwise, you are the business, and really all you've done is bought yourself a job. But if you want to have a business that can generate profit without you, you'll have to solve this piece. So with that in mind, it also doesn't get easier than right now, because we know the longer you leave something, the more people get stuck in their ways and the harder it becomes to change. And with all of the changes with AI and everything that we're seeing right now, there's never been a better time to systemize than right now. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, but if you're too busy and you don't have enough time, and what can you do? I'm going to suggest the best thing you could do is look for, we call them a systems champion, but someone who in your organization who can become one of their key responsibilities. I actually think a great way to do this is with a junior chiropractor, maybe someone who has already gone to uni, they've learned how to do the technical work, they haven't yet started up their own chiropractor business, and what a gift to give them, to have them come in and say, I'm going to teach you how to run a chiropractic business, which is different from being a chiropractor. I want you to come in with this role and you're going to be a systems champion. I want you to shadow me and I want you to learn these other pieces. I want you to help document them. And parts of these you're going to take off my plate and you're going to learn what it takes to run a chiropractic business. I feel like that path, you get a junior person, would be a great path for someone.
Yeah. I'm going to add one bit of advice to that, and I love that, is that you should get a hold of David's book because it takes you through this process. We haven't talked a lot about it today, but there's that 7 steps that David talks about, from kind of defining, assigning it onto the person, extracting the information, then we organize it, we integrate it, and then hopefully what we do is we scale and optimize there too. Now, you have been incredibly generous, and you have a bunch of books that you've set aside at absolutely no cost for our listeners. Can you share a little bit about how people can get that? I'll make sure the link is down underneath for people to get that. But this is incredibly generous, which I'm super grateful for.
Yeah. Look, I'm on a mission to free business owners worldwide from the day-to-day operations. Comes from that frustration I felt, and I wrote the book that I wish I had. And I love the work that you do. Our methods kind of cross over perfectly. And I wanted to give something through to your audience. If you're based in Australia or the US, I know you've got a global audience, you've got a good size audience here in Australia, we'll ship out a physical copy for you free. If you're outside of that, those areas, will give you a digital copy, but at no charge. This is just for your audience. So we've got a limited number of the physical copies. But yeah, really, it's just my way to get you on the path, because there is no other way than building a systems-driven business. Once you see it, you can't unsee it and you can't go back.
And I think, if your plan is, in the podcast here, we talk about increasing impact, income, and enjoyment. And one of the fastest ways for you to deliver on all 3 of those is by systematizing your business there as well. So, David, thank you so much for all that you do. Your book has been, as I said before, it is one of the top 10 books that I have read, and I read a lot, and I continue to come back and I recommend it to lots of people. I feel super grateful that I get to chat with you here again, and then even more grateful that my audience gets, if you're US or Aussie based, get a copy. And if you happen to be outside of that, then get the digital copy. That's what I've had. I've always had just the digital copy. It's great. I love that as a version too. So please download those. I can't wait to see what comes next for you as you continue to kind of evolve and learn more and to implement with all of this. So, buddy, thank you so much for sharing so generously today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Look forward to talking soon. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.